Another Star Trek fan. Well, I bet you might be pissed right now.
Considering the recent reveal of the plot for the new Star Wars show, Skeleton Crew. A bunch of kids find a mysterious ship and try to make their way home.
What is that?
That's just Star Trek Prodigy. Well, would you be surprised that this wouldn't be the first time another show seemed to copy a Star Trek series at the same time it was airing?
That's the topic on today's Facty Fiction, where we'll look at the Nickelodeon show SpaceCases and try to determine if it was just a kid-centered iteration of a popular format or a straight-up copy of Star Trek Voyager. And we'll discover the connection between all these properties and whether or not Paramount has been up to something dubious.
Thank you to everyone who likes and subscribes. I'm still very small and new to this, so every one of you feels very special. I'm so happy you're here to hang out.
Imagine yourself back in 1996 watching Nickelodeon. The daytime lineup is mostly dominated by cartoons, with a few grounded live-action offerings, like Clarissa and reruns of Salute Your Shorts and Hey Dude.
Back to school with SNICK.
But it's during SNICK, Saturday Night Nickelodeon, where things start to get interesting. Perhaps due to the popularity of the just completed run of Star Trek The Next Generation the year before, and the X-Files really starting to cook in its third season, sci-fi is having a renaissance, and shows like The Secret World of Alex Mack and Alan Strange begin to crop up. What the hell was that? Begin to crop up in children's TV as well.
Boys, I say boys!
Even so, a full-on kid-centered sci-fi space exploration show would be super ambitious, especially since it would be the most expensive pilot on Nick up to that point, in a joint production with the Canadian studio Cinar. But that's what we got. SpaceCases.
Your field test has been cancelled.
What?
The show revolved around a group of diverse, misfit alien space cadets who discover a mysterious ship, the Living Krista, get lost in space, and have to work together to find their way home. Leading the cast of kids was former Power Ranger Walter Jones as Harlan from Earth, a young Jewel State as Catalina from Saturn. Then we've got Rosie from Mercury, Bova from Uranus, and they did not pass on that opportunity.
I'm the butt of every joke.
Radu from Andromeda, who Harlan hates.
With an Andromedan watching my back? No thanks.
It's revealed later that Harlan's father was actually killed by Andromedans in an earlier war, but maybe in his future he's also a retro gamer? Then we have a stuck-up principal type and a washed-out instructor to watch over the kids. Plus, Thelma, the malfunctioning android.
And you are?
Who happened to be my favorite character as a kid, and I would quote her all the time and pretend to break down in front of my friends, and they would hate it because they didn't get it, because they didn't watch the show, and I don't know why I told you all that.
Plus, the show had some big-name guest actors. There's Mark frickin' Hamill right there, and George Takei would play the series' big bad.
Tell me everything I want to know about this ship.
Those are some serious pulls.
The darkest of nightmares haunt the Enterprise.
SpaceCases also didn't shy away from abridged versions of some complex Trek storylines. Who Goes Where is the Cases version of the TNG Night Terrors, where aliens cause hallucinations that test the crew's trust in each other. Forever Young de-ages crew members like Rascals. Nowhere Man is the next phase of the series, and The Friend in Need does the future imperfect lonely alien captures a crew member bit. This show had some writing weight to it, especially for Nickelodeon at the time. But this was right before Dan Schneider came along and turned every show into a Disney pop star maker.
That feels good.
Oh wait, maybe it wasn't. Did Dan start out as a set designer?
Watch it, Rosie! You're overheating again!
Run, Rosie! No, don't show him your feet! But I mean, this is all iteration, right? Stories get shared, and inspiration and expansion happens. But let's compare the first episode of SpaceCases, the one that sets up the series, to that of another Trek episode.
Hey, who put you in charge?
A group of misaligned and somewhat unseasoned or disgraced crew members get thrown across the galaxy by a white space phenomenon, setting up a series in which they will have to work through their differences, as well as fight for resources and supplies in order to make it back home in a large number of years, beginning with a 7.
Scenic route?
Set a course. For home.
And these shows were going on at the same time. Ow? Stay in your seat.
Fact v Fiction intermission question, there was another spin-off of a popular spacefaring series, Battlestar Galactica, proposed during the reboot's series height, that involved a band of kids getting separated from the main fleet and having to make their way back. But Ronald D. Moore, also a prominent Trek writer, reportedly hates kids, or at least children characters, so much in his shows that he squashed the spin-off like immediately. True or false? Stay to the end of the video for the answer.
5-card stud, nothing wild. And the sky's the limit.
Let's jump back to 1995. TNG had just ended the year before, and Deep Space Nine was about 2 years into its run. Executives at Paramount Pictures wanted another Star Trek show to accompany the launch of the new broadcast network, UPN.
Broadcast? Wow, that sounds even older than cable. And do you even remember cable? No, I didn't mean bring it back. That wasn't nostalgia. That wasn't nostalgia!
Voyager was originally conceived as a darker Trek, a constant fight for food and fuel, far away from the utopia of Starfleet and the Federation of Planets, with a fractured crew made up in part of outlaws.
Who is she to be making these decisions for all of us?
She's the captain.
A lot of these hard edges would be smoothed pretty quickly. The whole Maquis thing gets forgotten. Food scarcity is solved. Even the Year of Hell they had planned, where the ship would be heavily damaged and limp along for a season, was shortened to just 2 episodes, which, funny enough, caused the show to actually move closer in tone to Spacecases. There were even the same kinds of similar episodes shared between the shows. Persistence of Vision is Voyager's Night Terrors, or Who Goes Where. Long Distance Calls and Eye of the Needle involve the crews trying to contact home. Then there's Prime Factors and Trouble with Doubles, where each crew must ingratiate themselves to difficult alien cultures with access to technology that could send them home, only to find out at the last minute that using that technology would destroy their respective ships.
Again, this can all be chalked up to normal iteration of common sci-fi themes. But how did these shows do it at the same time? What's the connection between Trek and Spacecases? Well, meet the creators of Spacecases, Bill Mumy and Peter David.
Listen carefully. On my command, you will initiate signals for round trip to the planet Earth.
Affirmative.
Bill Mumy goes way back in terms of sci-fi, playing the original Will Robinson in the 1965 Lost in Space series. From there, he did a lot of acting and voice work, but his other big credit, aside from co-creating SpaceCases, that's him next to Hamill there too, was as Lennier on Babylon 5. There was even a crossover joke between SpaceCases and Babylon 5, where a stuffed bear is jettisoned out of an airlock in Babylon, only to be picked up by Radu and Rosie in that Who Goes Where episode.
What kind of a dope would toss a perfectly good Earth bear into space?
It's the thing that actually infects Radu with the hallucinations.
Apparently the bear was a gift from Peter David's wife to someone who worked on Babylon, who, as it turned out, hated cute things, and he showed his appreciation by spacing it in his show, which in turn led the Cases crew to bringing it back as a joke.
Peter David got a start in comics on the publishing side in the 80s, but within 3 years he was pitching and writing stories. This dude's touched everything, from Hulk to She-Hulk to even co-creating Spider-Man 2099. After work on a Star Trek comic book, he was tapped to start writing Trek novels for Pocket Books. He's responsible for the popular and long-running New Frontier series that started in 1997. But it's 1993's Starfleet Academy #1, Worf's first adventure, that is of most interest to us.
In the book, a young Worf must work together with a bunch of misfit cadets when an accident occurs on a space trip and, you know where I'm going with that. Actually, it wasn't very similar. But the thing you should remember about that book is it's the first appearance of the Brigar, a rock-like race of aliens created by David. Remember that for later.
So Peter was a seasoned Trek writer. What does that mean? Was SpaceCases a stealth adaptation of his Worf novel? Was it a scrapped Wesley Crusher-fronted Starfleet Academy spinoff?
Was he working on Voyager and SpaceCases at the same time, selling one script to 2 shows? Well, let's read what he has to say for himself.
What Nickelodeon was really looking for was a show about kids at a space academy. But I shuddered at the notion of a weekly show about an entire class of Wesley Crushers. There's a notion spawned in hell for you. So we went in a related but totally different direction that would still be simple and kid-oriented. 4 months after I wrote the pilot, Paramount announced the formation of UPN, the Paramount Network, and that the anchor would be a new Trek series entitled Voyager. A month later, they described the premise of Voyager: a ship falling through a spatial distortion, winding up at the far edge of the galaxy with a long trip home ahead of them. I proceeded to bang my head against the wall, fully aware that should our series ever get on air, I could look forward to lame brain reviewers declaring that it was inspired or even ripped off from Voyager.
After all that, it was just a crazy coincidence.
As if Voyager, for that matter, wasn't preceded by Red Dwarf, which was preceded by Lost in Space, which in turn was inspired by Swiss Family Robinson. We've got a series about space travelers trying to get home, and it was co-created by Will Robinson Mumy. What's Trek's excuse? SpaceCases would only last 2 seasons. According to David, while ratings were fine for the series, sci-fi can often take a few years to build up a dedicated audience. In his book, Mr. Sulu Grabbed My Ass, he explains that Nick tried to force a lot of bad changes in the second season, particularly giving notes that led to some characters acting out of character and sidelining others for cost reasons. They also lost Jewel State to another show, replacing Catalina with her imaginary friend Susie. The time slot kept changing, then came the nail in the coffin. The season 2 finale was set to air opposite the damn Super Bowl in 1997.
Now, I don't think the overlap between kids who are watching SpaceCases and also interested in the Super Bowl was very large, but that is usually a death note for any series regardless.
By the end of season 2, enough of the audience was turned off, and Peter got the call that there would be no season 3.
Now, the story doesn't end there. There's still one more mystery we need to examine. One which so far I actually haven't found the answer to. And honestly, it might put Paramount in a bad light.
Peter David and SpaceCases certainly left an impression on a lot of fans. So much so that when Star Trek Prodigy was first announced, Trekkies across the internet were wondering whether David and Mumy were involved. The premise is similar to SpaceCases. Gee, didn't Peter and Bill already cover some of the same ground with SpaceCases? It's shockingly similar to the just announced Prodigy. SpaceCases has the exact same premise to the upcoming Prodigy, and Peter David is working on that series too. Copycat! Remember the Brickar from that Young Worf book? The appearance of a character from that race, which had previously only been relegated to David's novels, being featured prominently in the main cast of Prodigy cemented the idea in a lot of people's minds that David had to at least be benefiting from his work in the show. It sounds a lot like SpaceCases, and coincidentally, Peter David created the Brickar. Makes me wonder if he's involved. Hopefully the novelist that created the species gets a small, large check from Paramount. Since Peter David wrote all the book series, if any payment is due, it's him. I mean, otherwise,
that would mean that Paramount would be using another similar plot and a unique creation of David's, but in a way that wasn't paying him. Yeah, we know that never happens, right?
If you look through all the cast and crew of Star Trek Prodigy, Bill Mumy, and especially surprisingly Peter David, are absent.
It's one thing when two creators who've worked in the sci-fi genre their entire lives, have seen and done it all, repeat the same themes occasionally. It's even fine to be inspired by other creators. Again, iteration is sometimes inescapable. We are shaped by our experiences, and that includes the media that we consume.
But it's another thing when a media company or corporation uses its large umbrella of IP made by for-hire creators and then subsequently shuts those creators out of the profits of that IP. Here's what another writer commented. Writing tie-ins is work for hire. Anything we create under contract for the studio is the property of the studio, to do with as they please. And book contracts aren't like screenwriters' contracts, which entitle them to royalties if their characters are reused. The only thing we get royalties for is sales of our books. That's why the Brickarian can be used without royalties to the author, Peter David, who created the planet Brickar and the species. And I want to be honest, I'm not 100% sure whether Paramount has done that here.
When I went looking to see what Bill and Peter had to say about Prodigy and whether anyone had ever brought up to them the same comparisons to SpaceCases, what I found was nothing.
Bill Mumy's last Twitter post is from 2020. He's still acting and doing voice work, but as far as I can tell, he doesn't have an online presence anymore. Peter David, unfortunately, has been going through some major health issues in the past few years. He hasn't updated his blog since 2020, and his last post on Twitter directs you to his Patreon, run by his wife, Kath. Most of his posts on his Patreon and his GoFundMe are about his health, and there have been some positive posts lately. You can read it for yourself. It sounds like he is more comfortable these days than he has been in the past, but according to Kath, their finances are still pretty insecure, with some of Peter's medical costs running up over $2,500 weekly.
Now again, I haven't found any mention from him about Prodigy using the Brickar or his thoughts about the similarities to SpaceCases, and it would feel weird to bother him with it while he recovers.
Remember, Paramount owns the Brickar and doesn't have to pay Peter anything. But I know from experience living in and having healthcare in the United States that if you need a GoFundMe to pay for medical expenses, you're probably not getting sweet Paramount residuals.
Now, I don't think anyone should hold any resentment towards Prodigy of all things. It's a great show with a loving fan base whose dedication saved it when it was canceled by Paramount Plus after its first season.
It was just announced that the second season would finally be airing on Netflix on July 1st. I hope it does well, and you should definitely check it out.
The thing I do know about, however, is how these big media corporations sometimes work to screw over creators.
Who do you think you are?
But remember he did co-create Spider-Man 2099, which just appeared in Across the Spider-Verse, and how he did do a run on the She-Hulk comic?
Hello.
According to a post on his Patreon, Disney, which owns Marvel, does pay him weekly, and even invited him out to the She-Hulk premiere. So good on Disney. But it does seem like he needs a lot more help. So... Paramount?
But what do you think? Is SpaceCases getting new life in the form of Prodigy? What about Skeleton Crew? Will it perhaps turn out to be a great show despite its similarities to past work, just like how Prodigy proved itself? And what about Paramount? Do you think it is or should be doing right by Peter David?
Peter has most likely worked on something you've loved over the years. He shouldn't need a GoFundMe from fans. He should be paid his due. But in the meantime, he is really close to his goal the last time I checked. And there's still a few copies of his book left on Amazon, plus you can join his Patreon. I'm sure every little bit helps, if you can manage it in these times. And finally, the answer to our intermission question, did Ronald D. Moore squash a kid-based Battlestar spin-off? No, I actually made all of that up. And I've never heard that he hates kids or children characters, but considering how the only kids in Battlestar end up murdered, nuked, or horribly abused, I don't know. Tell me I'm wrong on that one. Oh, I don't have any patrons or backers or anything like that, so if you look closely, these are actually the joke names from that Space Mutiny episode of Mystery Science Theater 2000. I just thought this song would be kind of fun to play over some credits, so. But we'll get there.